I just have a general question. Can you hear me? I'm just wondering if you could explain why there's such a resistance in Ireland to recognizing travelers as an ethnic minority, and if the other question is, if your ethnicity is recognized in the UK, how does Ireland justify not recognizing your ethnicity here in Ireland?
I think we'll take 3 questions from the floor, and then rather than respond to everyone, we'll take 3 questions and then we can decide who wants to respond to that. So if you write them down, that might be useful. Okay.
It's important to recognise ethnicity, but there are two ways. It flows both ways, and a lot of the minority groups who eventually got to be recognised did it with the support of a majority of the main group, and so I'm just wondering what steps are being taken on the traveller side to become more involved in the main communities, and therefore to get people from that side supporting them, because prejudice comes from ignorance and lack of knowledge, and I'd say a lot of settled people, or a lot of, not settled people, but a lot of non-travellers don't actually know much about the travelling community. So to get that out as well.
I just want to say well done, Hannah, and everybody up there. Presentation's excellent. I'm Kathleen Sherlock from Minkier Sweden, the All Travel Organisation, and I suppose I have a question that keeps coming up maybe in my mind, because of part of what we do is we go around the country having traveller-only discussions, and what's coming very, very clear is that there's a huge sense of isolation, particularly in different parts of the country with different travellers. And I suppose really I have a question on, well, obviously I don't think it's happening accidentally. I know that it's a deliberate thing that's happens, been organised by the state or the controllers who are basically controlling all of us, that we are taking this sense of oppression and we're oppressing ourselves. I suppose really it's important that we have to recognise the difficulties that we have to overcome to present ourselves within the community, because we're always being challenged, we're always being put down, we're always being pushed away. But I have a question that's coming out, and I suppose really the objection towards you, Hannah. During your research, I'm interested in, we know that there's anecdotal, I suppose we know that there's a huge number of people coming out of school every year who are basically illiterate, you know, who can't read or write or have the fundamentals of education. I'm also very much aware that travellers are going through the process and they're committing and they're bringing their children to school, and their children are going to school. Particularly when it's in primary school, they get up every morning, make sure their children there, make sure the children have everything. So the traveller parents are doing their job. The travel community are doing their job. I am interested, and if we can get research on that, of what percentage of the people who are coming out of school moving into primary are travellers who are illiterate. Now, there's a failure somewhere there that I know that there's many traveller children who have huge difficulties, who don't want to go to secondary, who don't want to go to even be in primary school sometimes because of the level of bullying that they're experienced. It is not seen to be an issue within primary school for traveller children to be called tinker or knacker. And it's not even seen to be an issue by their teachers or by their principals, who don't even recognise this as an issue. They're saying that if you are proud of who you are, you accept this derogatory terms or these put-downs or other things. My belief is that where travellers are majorly being failed, and I suppose really what I'm coming at is this, is that when we look at the issues that people are experiencing as adults, you know, that the high levels of depression, the high levels of suicide that's escalating, where 20 years ago suicide wasn't even an issue with travellers, is now there's hardly a family that's not been, or an extended family that has not been affected by it. I have a sense in myself that the message of how important or how not important you are is being pushed through the school system. And I think travellers are internalising that, and they're taking that on board. So as young travellers come out of the school system, they're asking themselves in primary school, because they have to go to school, what is in it for me to go to secondary school? Am I going to be experiencing more of the same? And the state or society does not have an expectation, and in fact are telling traveller children in non-verbally, but the message is getting home right into your soul that you are not important, that you are not going to exceed. We have no expectations. And we know that the reality is that for the vast majority of travellers, where they're going in their future once they come out of school, even though they've gone to primary, they're going to secondary, the vast majority will be unemployed. Some will get involved, unfortunately, of antisocial behaviour because there's nothing else to do, or they're frustrated or angry. Many will become severely depressed and become dependent upon medication, either prescription or otherwise, actually just to survive. Far too many are going to, sorry, I don't mean to be making this a big issue, but far too many then are ending up in prison. Now, we have to ask ourselves, why is that? Where is that coming from? And I believe it's coming through education, that travellers are being educated, that there's no expectation for you. So I would be interested, Hannah, if there is any evidence, or what are the statistics of how many children are coming out of school who are travellers that haven't got that education. I think it's interesting for parents to get it, and then maybe start pushing it home, realising that if your children are being denied an education within the primary school system, they are being set up to fail in future. And we know from around the country that even today, in different parts of there's a particular place we went to, that children who are in secondary school, because they legally have to be in school, they're not being educated, and there's 3, 4, 5 travelling young fellas on a daily basis kicking football and playing basketball within the sports complex during school time. That's all I have to say, but I'd be interested from that. Thank you.
Okay. I think I'll attempt to answer that question regarding education first, and then we'll pass down to Bridget for the ethnicity maybe, and we'll all say something. Just in relation to travellers leaving school with little or no numeracy or literacy, very little evidence in Ireland in relation to achievement based on ethnicity. In the UK, there is more research being done. There has been more research done. And I suppose that comes back again, that travellers aren't recognised as an ethnic group. Very hard for us to access those figures in education. And it would be brilliant if we had them, because it puts a spotlight on the state to show what's happening in terms of achievement. And it's better in terms of being able to question then why that's happening. Then the issues as to why young travellers don't have literacy leaving school. Again, they can be complex. Sometimes in the home, people aren't able to help their children with literacy. We know in the Galway Travel Movement that one of the solutions that we put in place for that was to set up the after-school project that Cindy coordinated. There's no investment being put into projects like that, although they're completely necessary. So a child is leaving school, they need to be able to go home and then have the support to do their homework. No fault of the parent, just doesn't have the skills to be able to do that. And then the child is being lost. The child is the person who's suffering because there's no investment in trying to rectify those issues. But just to say, Kathleen, that there is very little evidence in relation to achievement based on ethnicity in the Irish case, at least, and that it is an issue, and it's something that anyone who's doing research would consider an issue. And it's when we ring schools, they would say, "Well, we don't know who's a traveller and who's not because of this the lack of an ethnic identifier," and then nobody's accountable for it. But we know it anecdotally, we know it through experience that this is the reality. But if we wanted to change anything, we find it difficult to present those findings to the people that matter. So that's really unfortunate, and it's something that we have to cover. And it's another reason why ethnicity is incredibly important. Just to say that in Ireland, literacy and numeracy is a huge problem in general for the general population. Ireland took part in the PISA study in 2014, and the previous one, there's a massive literacy and numeracy strategy in place in all schools now, trying to tackle that programme, because we've been shown up kind of internationally in terms of our literacy and numeracy. But again, we don't know which groups are more affected by that. So is it literacy and numeracy in working class areas and minority ethnic groups that are they the groups that are suffering most, or is it the whole population? I mean, we can guess about that and we can speculate, but unfortunately the evidence, we don't have the evidence to kind of to prove that.
I'll attempt to answer the questions around ethnicity, and then anybody else in the panel can come in, because ethnicity, I suppose, is the core issue, and everybody has something to say on it. The resistance to recognise travellers, we feel, is just pure racism. And if you think about who are the decision makers and who holds the control to recognise ethnicity, it's people who are anti-traveller, who come out with anti-traveller comments, who want to keep travellers in our place, and who are oppressors. And that's what we feel is people, because we certainly self-identify as an ethnic group. Another issue is the caste issue, and people feeling that it's going to cost the state an awful lot. So our human rights are kind of balanced on maybe what it might cost the state. And some of the background discussions has been, will the traveller community expect an apology? Will the traveller community expect some kind of compensation? What would the cost be? So for instance, especially around education, I believe, and around children in care, the issue of children in care, if you look at how in the past the Irish state treated travellers and how they're treating travellers today, and Owen mentioned anger. I mean, as a traveller woman, I'm probably one of many people here who had to go for anger management therapy to try to deal with when you're awakened to the issues that your people have put up with for generations. And to see children coming out of education that can't read, and millions pumped into education, and travellers not getting any benefit from it. It's really hard to take. And then all those millions taken away. Now there's all the supports. I mean, most of the supports for traveller education has been taken away. So somebody said there that children are being lost. A whole generation of children are going to be lost to exactly the kind of issues that Kathleen talked about. And we're kicking and screaming as activists, and we're not being heard. So that's the kind of issues, I suppose, that we're dealing with as activists, and that's the resistant, a bit of background around the people who hold the power, what they think of us. And that's the kind of resistance that's there to recognising traveller ethnicity, because they don't want us, for some reason, to be recognised as people, because they don't think we're valuable enough as individuals and as a community to have that kind of status. And that's my own personal opinion and my professional opinion. In the UK and Ireland, why in the UK? We don't know why. And we know the Irish state have gone on kind of visiting over fact-finding missions to find out what the consequences for travellers in the UK are. There's no reason why they shouldn't recognise us. And under the Good Friday Agreement, they should recognise us. There's an onus there on them to do that. the steps to be taken then around getting the support of the non-traveller community. Of course, as any one of us here, we can't work in isolation. And we have to work and reach out all the time to the settled community. But I suppose the approach that we have taken in the last while is, yes, we do that, but first of all, we've done that for 25 years. Now we need to really focus on our own community and build that support within our own community and build our community up and stand in solidarity with each other so that we're standing up and we all know what we want together. So we put a lot of investment into empowering our own community and supporting each other as peers around the fight for ethnicity. And we've seen that and we've shown that where the national groups and the local groups have stood in solidarity on this issue for the last 25 years, but particularly in the last 5 years. What we've done to reach out to the local groups is that we have information sessions. We have events all the time that we invite the local community to come in. Our doors are always open in all the local groups and all the national groups. And also then we lobby politicians, we lobby lots of settled people, non-travellers stand in solidarity with us. Lots of other minority groups stand in solidarity with us. So we're not doing it alone. There are a lot of people that stand in solidarity with us. But I suppose the focus for the Irish Traveller Movement has been in really, let this be an issue that our own people take on very strongly and stand proud on. I don't know if anybody else wants to.
I suppose from the community kind of aspect, there seems to be 5 common trends all around ethnic denial. There seems to be funds, which I think is like, if we base funds on our access to human rights, there's other questions there. And it's based around lack of information, which is not a realistic kind of objection. We have the denial of facts or questioning of research, which again, as Hannah was saying earlier, is quite a tentative issue, especially as a kind of minority itself trying to push forward against around issues around fear, which is another aspect. There's a lot of fear of change. And I think there's also the common trend that a lot of people from within the community feel is an act of punishment. Within kind of ethnicity, there seems to be almost 2 dualities. There's theoretical ethnicity and all of what that entails. And there's also a legal standing, which our community actually fulfills. So kind of when it actually comes down to it, it's denial. There shouldn't be any bar from these resistances. We can all draw conjectures of what ethnicity means, but on the legal standing of what people are looking for, we're looking for the legal fulfillment of the standing that we have reached. There is no reason to say no. There's no reason to say we need to research more, we need to go back, we're worried about things, we don't have the funds for it. We fulfill the legal criteria. Anyone?
And just in relation to funds, there's millions even now being pumped into the traveller infrastructure, but you don't see it. Like Hannah spoke about the cuts to traveller education, to traveller accommodation, to the community development and human rights sector. So the people aren't feeling it. So the empowerment of the people, there's no investment in the empowerment of travellers. There's investment in people who work with travellers and structures that keep travellers in our place. And that's my own opinion. I don't know what the rest of the panel would think about that.
And what it comes down to the stuff that we talked earlier, with why we're being denied our ethnicity, because our government couldn't care less about the negative consequences that has on the traveller community. And it links into that as well about how do we build those links with the settled community. I mean, I don't know if that's our job. We do what we can do to build solidarity, but I think the settled community are morally obliged to stand with us, to stand with any group that's oppressed, anyone who's in a position of power. That's your moral obligation. It's not something that you do from 9 to 5 because you're paid to do it. It's not something that it's something that you should do because it's the right thing to do. And I don't think it's up to us to be preaching to people to tell them that that's what they should be doing. I think they should come to those conclusions themselves, or that their society or that their education system should teach them that that's the right thing to do, and that's a good way to conduct your life, you know.
Sorry, just to add to what's already been said, just in terms of the refusal by the state to recognise travellers as an ethnic minority. Actually, I should just say who I am. I'm Maria Joyce, the National Traveller Women's Forum. I mean, I agree with everything that's already been said, and it's very much the reason why. But I think some of it as well is that there's absolutely no political will out there when it comes to travellers, in terms of as a group that are strong, that have a long shared history. I mean, travellers fit both the European and the international criteria that's laid down by both European and international human rights organisations. But the state is still refusing, and part of that is the political will. There's a historical, I mean, the state historically, in its developments of policies of travellers right from the 40s and 50s, was very much about seeing them as a problem and as deviant, and as how we can actually, you know, and dropouts, and how we can, the state looked at it in terms of how they can assimilate travellers back in to settled society, because that's where they're seen as coming from, without any, you know, again, you know, recognition of the rich, diverse culture that was there, and that didn't just sprout up overnight. And unfortunately, while some of the language has changed since the 40s, 50s and 60s, the practice hasn't, and when it comes to some of the state legislation and how it gets implemented. And that's why we are sort of, in terms of where we are at the minute, with consistent refusal, despite both European and international interventions, and saying to this Irish state, it's the right thing to do in terms of recognising travellers as an ethnic minority. Can I just say congratulations to the speakers? Really well done. And I hope I'm not in any way lessening anyone's input, but I'd just like to congratulate Cindy. She was fantastic, and just some of the messages that she was given. And I think she said, I think she summed up a lot of where we are in this state right now when she said that discrimination and racism is expected by the young people, by young travellers. It's become normalised. And I think it's a sorry state that has a significant proportion of its young people. And travellers are young people. Very few of us, based on all facts in terms of health, very few of us live to be old. We are a very young population, and I think that kind of mentality is very much then reflected of the challenges and the issues that were addressed and named here today in relation to education, in relation to suicide. But I also like the point she made where the young people were still proud of who they are as travellers. And I think that's very telling in terms of, despite the oppression and the discrimination and the racism and the challenges experienced by travellers, that the young people are still proud of who they are. I think it's really important. I'm just going to finish on one point, and it's already got named this morning, but I think it's a really important one. In terms of the whole sort of political representation and having a voice in terms of travellers, it's hugely important, because it's one of the key areas where I suppose we are always knocking on the door, trying to change, trying to have a say in the decisions which affect us and which actually matter to us in our everyday lives. And I think in terms of that being a key piece in terms of political travellers represented in the political sphere is hugely important. And finally, just one, I did say was the other one was the final point, but this one it definitely is. Just in relation to the sort of how we can build relationships with the majority population, I suppose in some ways travellers have been to the lead in terms of community development, and that was especially so in the 60s and 70s, where out of traveller activism and a real want to see change happening, you could nearly say the current model of community development has come as a result of that. And I think it's just a little bit really unfortunate then that travellers haven't sort of really, you know, the benefits in terms of haven't really materialised, and it hasn't been from the want of slog and the struggle that has gone on and continues to go on. But just to make that point as well, and I'm shutting up now.
My name is Obet Makaza. I'm with the GTM currently as a student on placement. From my note, I'm doing community and youth work. I suppose, having come from a country, Zimbabwe, where you would have similar kind of context where you had one group which was predominantly dominant in the community, and then I would come from a minority group that was considered not really part of Zimbabwean, but not really Zimbabwean. And just to politically, it took the leader of the minority after quite a lot of things that happened that included hatred, included killings, included discrimination at a very high level. But it was when the leader from the minority became part of the government, because he actually became the vice president, and there was a controversy because you had already a vice president, so you had a situation where you had two vice presidents just for the sake of recognition that there is a working together at the top. But like Bridget said there, that recognition mapped out a road that was to follow. Up to now, I know there are still issues there, but they're not as it were before, because a roadmap started there to say, okay, there is a way of working together. But I'm just saying that to say this, the children in Ireland, because if you look at the context of today, there's been a lot of research. There's been a lot of work. I really, maybe it's to concentrate on what should we do, what can be done. I believe that a child who later on becomes an adult, you and me today, if today the children, the traveler children that are already in the community can really, is there a way, maybe I pose it as a question, is there a way that they can stand for their right? While, of course, ITM is doing what they are doing in terms of fighting for ethnicity, but I think it's a right of a child to fight for their mental health, to say, where does the state, because it enshrines child protection, whether traveler or non-traveler, can that be put, because the scientific proof there enough? A child who is mentally not stable in terms of what they are being told, in terms of what they are experiencing, definitely is a scientifically proven that it will affect their health at school, at home, and generally into their future. The figures speak for themselves, even their lifelong, that's where it's coming from. So if maybe we can look at how a child can just fight for the right to be respected, whether they are travelers or non-travelers, and then without really taking away from who they are, that fight is going on there. But I think we have a best to, that is going to call for partnership at home, that even our parents or whoever is here who can, it starts with us. We know the research has done that. We know that's what has been happening. But how can we move forward? If we can even start to tell that you are a traveler and you are proud, you don't have to be afraid of it. And how those supports can be, I know it's a very difficult turnaround point in our lives, but I'm just hoping that that can be done as well.
Just like, as everyone else has said, I'd just like to congratulate the speakers. I thought they were extremely, the speeches were very emotive and thought-provoking. But just to put, I just wonder, I'm kind of coming away with my heart really heavy, and I'm going, oh my God, this is, you know, there's a lot of issues and challenges going forward. And I just wonder, in the last 10 years, surely there has been some positive developments and going forward, just, you know, because I see a lot of positivity, but, you know, I would just wonder, that's my question. So what are the positives? And there must be some, there must be some.
Yeah, I suppose it is the leadership, the fact that we're sitting here today and the voice, and but I think that that's one of the biggest positives for me and for all of us, is that leadership that's come out of the movement. I know when I started out as an activist, the first time I attended a meeting was Minker Whitten. One of the first times I attended a traveller-only space, feeling, Jesus, that I'd come home, and it was wonderful to see other travellers who were like me, who could, who had the same kind of views and beliefs, and I felt really comfortable in that space, you know. So I think for me and for the rest of us, probably that's one of the major things that has come out of the last 20 years, is that travellers now have a voice and aren't afraid to use it, you know.
Them and being part of how the solutions can be put in place around addressing them. I think we have to look at where some of the really positive policy developments have happened. And as Bridget spoke really well about this morning, that was a fight, and a hard fight fought in relation to some of those positive policy developments. Unfortunately, what we have not seen is the delivery of those positive policy developments on the ground. And I think that in a way has been a hugely unfortunate thing. But not just that has impacted greatly on the everyday lives of travellers, whether it be in accommodation, education, health, as has been spoken about. But the developments of those positive policy developments was positive, but it was a hard-fought battle. But we haven't seen implementation. And I know sometimes when we gather in a space like this, there can be sometimes the negative that we hear. But I mean, I as a traveller activist and as a traveller who's been involved in this sector for going on now 20 years, do firmly believe that equality is achievable. I would not still be here doing this work if I didn't. I firmly believe that the recognition of travellers as an ethnic minority is achievable. And I firmly believe that while we will not see if we got it today, we would not see the change we'd want tomorrow. It wouldn't happen quick enough for us. But as has been already said, that is making a serious statement. But I do believe equality is achievable, and I wouldn't be here otherwise.
Yeah, and I think that's right. And I think, like, I believe that as well, that of course equality is achievable, and that we have the language now, that, like, I know for myself, speaking on a personal level, that I now have the language to challenge things that affect my life, and that I can do that comfortably, and I can do it with conviction, that I can go into spaces and I have the knowledge to know that I have the right to challenge stuff, and that I'm not afraid to make demands. And I suppose when I see it, that's happened for me personally, of course that's transferable to other people. And I think that's that we never lose sight of that, not any of us, that's why we're all here, and that's what we're all fighting for.
Hannah, can I just like to, Margaret from Galway Travel Movement as well, I'd just like to say I just found the morning brilliant, and found all the inputs just inspiring, and just from a settled person's perspective, I think it's way beyond time that the challenge and the demand is going out there, and I'm delighted it's coming from the class of just 4 classy speakers. So I just want to say that from the pit of my stomach. Okay, thank you.
I just want to say well done to the 4 of you, but it's just something, Bridget, you said about if you mention the recognition of ethnicity travellers, they don't know what it is, but if you ask them, who are they? As a traveller, they're well able to say who they are. So I think the travellers, plain speaking, they need to understand and explain to what ethnicity really is in a very short sentence. And I think they'll stand up more and solidarity to one another if they know what they're standing for. So just well done.
And I think there has to be space for both things, because plain speaking is important, but it's also like you have to remember the people you're talking to don't speak plain language, so you have to learn their language. It's like I said, it's their house, and you have to learn the language of the oppressor in order to be able to challenge the oppressor. So you have to give credit to the people who go out there and try and learn that language and try and challenge the oppressor on their own terms, because the oppressor won't listen to plain speech. And that's the reality, and I think we realise that and come to that conclusion with heavy hearts ourselves oftentimes. Yeah, I think that.
And we've done I suppose, throughout the last 4 years, we've done the workshops on a local level, but as many workshops as we could do 20 more or 50 more if we had the resources every year, because there's so many people out there that are so eager to have spaces to talk about the issues that are affecting them, to talk about the snatching away of their identities, snatching away of their basic human rights, and to talk about where we're going as a people into the future. We can't keep up with the demand, I suppose, to create those spaces. And the reality is now that those spaces are needed to talk about just break down whatever we're doing. We don't have the resources to do them anymore. So we're going back to a place where we started in the Irish Traveller Movement, if you like, 20 years ago, where we did road shows. We're going back to that style again, because literally groups cannot afford to come to us, people cannot afford to come to us. So we're going back on again, and our limited resources out to them. And hopefully, as we go out, more people will understand what ethnicity is and around it, identity, and that those spaces will be created for people to be heard.
We talked about this earlier. I think we should go for a break after this, but we talked about this earlier, and I think in terms of support from the settled community, I mean, sometimes I feel like you get more support, and that varies, that swings. Sometimes you get no support at all from your own community when you're out there and you're trying to make changes. There's a lot of bitterness, there can be an awful lot of resentment and pettiness from our own community. We're not perfect, we're the same, I mean, we're humans in the same way as the settled people are. And I suppose that's a positive, is that that feeling that we have as individuals, that there is an awful lot of support from the settled community, an awful lot of settled people rooting for you, delighted to see you in the spaces that are theirs, that are some of your best supporters at times. And I think that's an incredibly positive thing that has come out of all of the work that we've done as well. So.
Okay. We would just say it's just a housekeeping issue, and just like to give a big round of applause to the 4 speakers, and we'll go for lunch, but there is a housekeeping issue, and that is we need to rearrange the room. So if people could take their personal belongings with them, there is lunch available and it looks good, but I just want to say the artist piece, in case people didn't think we appreciated all your hard work, the results of your hard work are on display in the foyer around lunch, so please enjoy them, and they're spectacular, and thanks to Pete and all the speakers.